Kim Tae-ho sat in his small office on Luna Station eating cold noodles from a plastic cup. The 32-year-old Korean man had been working as a translator for the Galactic Communication Bureau for 5 years now, and honestly, he was getting bored most days. He just sat at his desk reading alien text files and converting them into human language reports. It was not exactly the exciting space career he had dreamed about as a kid. The office was tiny, with just enough room for his desk, a computer terminal, and a small window that looked out at the gray surface of the moon. Earth hung in the black sky like a blue marble, and sometimes Tae-ho would stare at it and wonder what his friends back home were doing. Right now, they were probably having dinner with their families while he was here eating instant noodles alone. His colleagues at the bureau often made jokes about him. They called him the human dictionary because he could learn new languages so fast, while other translators struggled with basic alien grammar for months. Tae-ho could usually figure out the basic structure of a new language. In just a few days, his brain seemed to work differently when it came to understanding how different species communicated. The problem was that most of his work was incredibly boring. He spent his days translating trade agreements, shipping manifests, and diplomatic letters between human colonies and alien governments. It was important work, but it was not exciting. Nobody ever called him for emergency situations or first contact scenarios. Those jobs went to the senior translators who had been working in space for decades. Tae-ho had grown up in Seoul, dreaming of exploring the galaxy and meeting alien species. He had studied linguistics in college and learned 6 human languages before he even applied to work for the Bureau. His parents had been proud when he got the job, but now 5 years later, he was starting to wonder if he had made a mistake. Maybe he should have stayed on Earth and become a teacher like his mother wanted. The evening shift was usually quiet. Most of the other translators had gone home or were working on long-term projects. Tae-ho was watching an old Korean movie on his computer when the emergency alert came through. The loud beeping sound made him jump and spill noodle broth on his desk. Emergency Priority 1 flashed on his screen in red letters. Tae-ho had never seen a Priority 1 alert before. He quickly clicked on the message, and his eyes widened as he read the details. A human exploration vessel had crashed on an unknown planet. The crew was alive, but they were being held prisoner by the local alien population. The planet was called Vega Prime, and it was located in a system that humans had never visited before. The exploration ship Discovery had been on a routine survey mission. When their engines failed, they had managed to send one distress signal before crash landing on the planet's surface. That signal had been picked up by a monitoring station 3 days ago. According to the report, the local aliens were called the Rakeshi. They were a warrior species that stood over 8 feet tall with 4 arms and copper-colored skin. The crashed humans were being held in what appeared to be some kind of arena complex. The Rakeshi seemed to be preparing them for gladiatorial combat. Tae-ho felt his heart racing as he read more details. 3 humans had survived the crash: Captain Lee So-young, who was the ship commander; engineer Park Min-wo, who had tried to repair the engines; and medical officer Han Ji-ae, who had been treating the injured crew members when the ship went down. Previous attempts to communicate with the Rakeshi had failed completely. The aliens seemed to have no interest in talking to the rescue ships that had arrived in orbit. They had made threatening gestures and had moved the human prisoners to a heavily guarded compound in the center of their largest city. The Galactic Council was desperate. They needed someone who could learn the Rakeshi language quickly and establish communication. Before the aliens decided to kill the prisoners, several senior translators had already refused the mission, saying it was too dangerous. The Rakeshi were known to be aggressive and unpredictable. Tae-ho stared at the screen, reading the same information over and over again. This was exactly the kind of mission he had always dreamed of, a chance to actually make a difference instead of just translating boring documents. But it was also terrifying. The report made it clear that whoever took this job might not come back alive. His computer chimed with an incoming call. Director Kim Sun-mi appeared on the screen. She was the head of the translation department and one of the most respected linguists in human space. She looked tired and worried. Director Kim, we have a situation, she said. Without any greeting, we need someone to go to Vega Prime immediately. The Rakeshi are planning to force our people to fight in their arena tomorrow at sunset. We have maybe 18 hours to establish communication and negotiate their Release Tejo felt his mouth go dry. "Why are you calling me director?" he asked quietly. "I'm just a junior." "Translator, because you are the fastest language learner we have," she replied. "And because everyone else is either too scared or too busy with other assignments. The transport ship is leaving in 1 hour. If you agree to go, you will be the only translator." On the mission, the weight of the decision hit him like a physical force. 3 human lives depended on his answer. If he said no, the prisoners would probably die fighting alien warriors in an arena. If he said yes, he might die trying to save them. Either way, people were going to get hurt. Tejo thought about his peaceful life on Luna Station, his boring but safe job, his routine of instant noodles and old movies. He thought about his ex-girlfriend Nari, who had always said he was too passive, too afraid to take risks. She had broken up with him because she said he would never do anything important with his life. He also thought about Captain Lee So-young, Engineer Park Min-woo, and Medical Officer Han Ji-ae sitting in alien prison cells, waiting for someone to save them. They had been brave enough to explore unknown space, and now they needed someone to be brave enough to help them. The director was still waiting for his answer. Tejo could see the desperation in her eyes. The entire bureau was counting on him to say yes, even though they all knew it was probably a suicide mission. "I will do it," Tejo said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good," the director replied with obvious relief. "A transport will pick you up in 30 minutes. Pack light and bring your portable translation equipment. Everything you need to know about the Rakeshi is in the mission files." "Good luck, Tejo. We are all counting on you." Call ended, leaving Tejo alone in his small office staring at the emergency alert on his screen. In 30 minutes, he would be on a ship heading toward an alien planet where warriors twice his size were preparing to kill human prisoners. And somehow he was supposed to learn their language fast enough to save them. He looked out his window at Earth one more time, then he started packing. The transport ship reached Vega Prime after a 12-hour journey that felt like forever to Tejo. He had spent most of the trip studying everything the human database contained about the Rakeshi culture. The information was limited and mostly came from long-range observations and intercepted communications. What he learned made him even more nervous. The Rakeshi were a warrior society that had been fighting among themselves for thousands of years. They settled disputes through combat and believed that strength was the only thing that mattered in life. Their leaders were always the best fighters, and they had no concept of peaceful negotiation. The planet itself was mostly desert, with huge cities built around massive stone arenas where the Rakeshi held their combat competitions. The largest arena was in the capital city where the human prisoners were being held. It could seat over 50,000 spectators and was surrounded by military compounds. As the transport ship entered the atmosphere, Tejo could see the arena from orbit. It was a gigantic circular structure made of red stone that looked like it had been carved from a mountain. The buildings around it were smaller, but still impressive, with tall towers and thick walls that showed this was a society built for war. The ship landed at a safe distance from the city, and Tejo was transferred to a smaller shuttle that would take him closer to the arena. He was wearing a translation device that would help him understand basic Rakeshi words, but he knew that learning their complex language and culture would require direct contact. The shuttle pilot was a grizzled space marine named Sergeant Chun, who had volunteered for the mission. He looked at Tejo with obvious doubt as they approached the landing zone near the arena. "You sure about this translator?" the sergeant asked. "You look like you have never been in a fight in your life. These Rakeshi eat guys like you for breakfast." Tejo tried to sound more confident than he felt. "I am not here to fight, I am here to talk." The sergeant laughed grimly. "Good luck with that, kid. From what I have heard, these aliens do not do much talking. They prefer letting their fists do the communicating." The shuttle landed in a dusty field outside the arena walls. Almost immediately they were surrounded by Rakeshi warriors who emerged from hidden positions. The aliens were even more impressive in person than Tejo had imagined. They stood over 8 feet tall, with 4 muscular arms and skin that looked like polished copper. Their leader stepped forward, and Tejo got his first real look at a Rakeshi warrior up close. The alien wore metal armor decorated with carved symbols and carried weapons that looked like they could cut through steel. His forearms moved in complex patterns as he spoke in a language that sounded like a combination of growling and singing. The translation device in Tejo's ear gave him basic words but missed most of the meaning. The Rikishi leaders seemed to be asking who they were and what they wanted. Teiho took a deep breath and stepped forward, raising his hands in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. He tried to speak in the few Rikishi words he had learned during the journey, but his pronunciation was terrible. The alien warriors laughed at his attempts, and some of them made threatening gestures with their weapons. Teiho realized that his electronic translator was not going to be enough. The Rikishi leader barked an order, and several warriors grabbed Teiho, roughly lifting him off the ground with their forearms. They carried him toward the arena while Sergeant Chun was forced to stay with the shuttle. Teiho tried not to panic as he was taken through massive stone corridors decorated with carvings of ancient battles. The arena itself was breathtaking in its size and brutality. The floor was covered with sand that had been stained dark with blood over the centuries. Thousands of empty seats rose up in circles around the fighting area, and Teiho could imagine the roar of the crowd during combat events. In the center of the arena, 3 humans sat in iron cages that looked like they had been built specifically for smaller prisoners. Captain Lee So-young looked up as Teiho was brought in, and her face showed a mixture of hope and fear. She was a woman in her early 40s with short black hair and the kind of calm expression that came from years of command experience. Engineer Park Minwoo was younger, maybe in his 20s, with the lean build of someone who spent most of his time working with machinery. He had a bandage around his head from the crash, but his eyes were alert and focused. Medical Officer Han Jae was the oldest of the 3, a woman in her 50s who had clearly been treating the injuries of her fellow prisoners. The Rikishi leader, who Teiho would later learn was called Chief Balix, pointed at the human prisoners and spoke in his growling language. The translation device caught some words that seemed to be about fighting and death and honor. Teiho realized that the aliens were planning to make the humans fight each other, or maybe fight against. Rikishi warriors Chief Balix turned to Teiho and spoke more slowly, this time as if he was trying to communicate something important. The translation device gave Teiho fragments of meaning, something about sunset and combat and proving worthiness. It seemed like the Rikishi were giving him until sunset to do something, or the fighting would begin. Teiho looked at the 3 prisoners and then at the massive alien chief. He had maybe 6 hours to learn enough of the Rikishi language to negotiate for their release. The problem was that these aliens seemed to have no interest in peaceful negotiation. They only understood strength and combat. Captain Lee So-young called out to him in Korean, asking if he was there to rescue them. Teiho nodded, but he was not sure how to explain that he was just a translator with no weapons, no backup plan, and no idea how to deal with a warrior culture that settled everything through fighting. Chief Balix seemed amused by the exchange between the humans. He said something that made the other Rikishi warriors laugh, and Teiho caught enough words to understand that they found it funny that the humans were sending someone so small and weak to negotiate. The chief gestured for Teiho to sit on the arena floor and then began speaking more slowly, pointing at objects and saying their names in Rikishi. It took Teiho a moment to realize that the alien was actually trying to teach him the language. This was unexpected, but it gave him hope. For the next several hours, Teiho sat in the sand of the arena learning Rikishi words and grammar directly from Chief Balix. The alien was surprisingly patient for a warrior and seemed genuinely interested in communication. The other Rikishi warriors watched with curiosity as their leader taught the small human their language. As the sun moved across the sky above the arena, Teiho began to understand more of what the aliens were saying. The Rikishi language was complex with different meanings, depending on how you positioned your body and arms while speaking. It was like learning to dance and talk at the same time. By late afternoon, Teiho could hold basic conversations with Chief Balix. The alien leader seemed impressed by how quickly the human was learning and began asking questions about human culture and society. The other Rikishi warriors gathered around to listen as Teiho tried to explain how humans lived and fought and solved problems. The critical moment came when Chief Balix asked about human strength and how they had managed to travel between the stars if they were so small and weak. Teiho realized that this was his chance to explain that humans were strong in different ways than the Rikishi. Stood up in the arena sand and began to speak in Rikishi about human cooperation and technology and intelligence. He explained that humans did not need to be physically strong because they were smart enough to build machines and work together. to solve problems. The Rikishi warriors listened with growing interest. As Teiho described human cities and spaceships and the way humans had spread across the galaxy not through conquest but through exploration and trade, Chief Balix asked many questions and seemed fascinated by the idea of a species that was weak individually but strong as a group. As the sun began to set, Chief Balix stood up and made an announcement to his warriors. Teiho caught most of the words and realized that the alien leader was proposing a different kind of test. Instead of making the humans fight each other, he wanted to test whether human intelligence could match Rikishi's strength. The challenge would be for Teiho to solve 3 ancient riddles that had puzzled Rikishi scholars for generations. If he succeeded, the humans would go free. If he failed, all 4 humans would fight in the arena until only one remained. Teiho looked at the 3 prisoners and then at Chief Balix. He had come here to translate, but now he was being asked to match wits with an alien culture that had been thinking about these problems for centuries. He nodded his acceptance and the real test began. As the sun touched the horizon, Chief Balix called for the ancient riddle keeper, an elderly Rikishi emerged from the shadows of the arena, moving slowly but with great dignity. Master Vorth was clearly very old, even by Rikishi standards. His copper skin was marked with scars from countless battles, and his forearms moved with the careful precision of someone who had earned respect through both strength and wisdom. The arena began to fill with spectators as word spread that something unusual was happening. Thousands of Rikishi warriors climbed into the stone seats, carrying torches that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The sound of their voices created a low rumble that seemed to make the entire structure vibrate. Master Vorth stood in the center of the arena and raised his forearms for silence. The crowd immediately quieted, showing the deep respect they had for the old warrior. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the massive space, even though he did not seem to be shouting. The first riddle came from the ancient times when the Rikishi were still learning what it meant to be truly strong. Master Vorth looked directly at Teiho as he spoke, and the human translator felt the weight of thousands of alien eyes watching him. What force can move mountains without touching them? Master Vorth asked in the formal language of riddles. What power can defeat armies without fighting? What strength can make the mightiest warriors bow down without conquest? Teiho felt his heart pounding as he considered the riddle. He had 1 hour to find an answer that would satisfy not just Master Vorth, but the entire Rikishi Council. The 3 human prisoners watched from their cages, and he could see the fear in their eyes. The young translator began to pace the arena floor, trying to think like a Rikishi warrior while also drawing on his human experience. The riddle was about different types of strength and power, but he needed to find answers that would make sense to a culture that valued physical combat above everything else. As he walked in circles on the blood-stained sand, Teiho thought about his own life back on Luna Station. Everyone had always considered him weak because he avoided fights and preferred books to battles, but maybe that was exactly what he needed to understand this riddle. The force that moves mountains without touching them could be many things. Water wore away stone over time, creating valleys and changing the shape of continents. Wind could carve rocks into strange formations, and earthquakes could split mountains in half. But there was something deeper that the riddle was asking. Abudaho thought about the stories his grandmother used to tell him about the old kings of Korea who conquered their enemies not through battle, but through wisdom and patience. They would wait for the right moment and then strike when their opponents were weakest, or they would convince enemy generals to switch sides. The answer began to form in his mind as he remembered a conversation with his father about the ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu, who had written that the supreme excellence was to subdue the enemy without fighting. That was the kind of strength the riddle was asking about. He stopped pacing and looked up at Master Vorth. The old Rikishi warrior was watching him with eyes that seemed to see everything. Teiho took a deep breath and began to speak in the formal riddle language. He had been learning the force that moves mountains without touching them is time, he said, his voice carrying across the arena. Time flows like water, wearing away the strongest stone, making valleys where mountains once stood. Time defeats the mightiest fortress and humbles the proudest king. The crowd murmured, but Master Vorth raised his arms for silence. Teiho continued speaking with growing confidence as the answer became clearer in his mind. The Power that defeats armies without fighting is knowledge. He declared, a wise general knows his enemy better than the enemy knows himself. He wins the battle before it begins by choosing when and where to fight. He defeats his opponents by making them defeat themselves. The Rikishi warriors in the crowd began to nod their heads as they recognized the truth in what the human was saying. Even in their warrior culture, they understood that the smartest fighters were often the most successful, the strength that makes the mightiest warriors bow down. Without conquest is respect. Taeho continued, his voice growing stronger. True respect cannot be taken by force or demanded through fear. It must be earned through honor and wisdom and sacrifice for others. When warriors bow to such strength, they do so willingly because they recognize something greater than themselves. Master Vorth stood in silence for a long moment, considering the answer. The arena was completely quiet except for the crackling of torches and the distant sound of wind across the desert. Finally, the old warrior nodded slowly. The first riddle is answered, he announced to the crowd. You have shown that you understand the deeper meaning of strength, young human translator. You speak wisdom that many of our own warriors have not yet learned. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Taeho felt a wave of relief wash over him. But he knew that 2 more riddles remained, and they would probably be even more difficult than the first. Chief Balix approached him with what seemed like approval in his alien features. You begin to understand us, the chief said in his own language. But the next riddle will test whether you truly know what it means to be brave. Master Vorth called for silence again, and the crowd settled down to hear the second riddle. This one was about courage and sacrifice, and Taeho knew that it would be much more personal than the first. What warrior fights without weapons? The old Rikishi asked. What champion wins without victory? What hero dies without defeat? This riddle struck at the heart of what Taeho was doing right now. He was fighting for the lives of 3 strangers, using nothing but words and intelligence. He was trying to win a battle that could not be won through traditional combat, and he was risking his own life for people he had never met before. The human translator looked at Captain Lee So-young, Engineer Park, Min Woo, and Medical Officer Han Jie sitting in their iron cages. They had all risked their lives exploring unknown space, and now they were depending on him to save them. The answer to this riddle was about sacrifice and selflessness. It was about people who fought battles that others could not see and won victories that others would never know. It was about heroes who died protecting others and lived on in the memories of those they saved. Taeho thought about his own parents who had worked long hours at difficult jobs to pay for his education. They had fought against poverty and uncertainty without weapons or glory. They had won the victory of giving their son a better life, even though they never received recognition for their sacrifice. He thought about teachers who spent their lives sharing knowledge with students who might never thank them. He thought about doctors who risked infection to treat dangerous diseases. He thought about soldiers who died far from home protecting people they would never meet. The warrior who fights without weapons is the one who battles ignorance with teaching fear, with compassion and hatred with understanding. Taeho said, his voice echoing through the arena. They fight with words and ideas and examples instead of swords and spears. The champion who wins without victory is one whose success is measured not in enemies defeated, but in lives saved, problems solved, and futures protected. Their victory is not celebrated with parades, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing they made the world better. The hero who dies without defeat is the one whose legacy lives on in the people they protected and the ideals they defended. They may lose their life, but their cause continues through others who were inspired by their example. Master Vorth nodded again, and the crowd cheered even louder than before. The Rikishi warriors were beginning to understand that this small human translator possessed a different kind of strength than they had ever encountered. 2 riddles answered, the old warrior announced, but the final riddle is the most difficult of all. It will test whether you understand the greatest treasure, the sharpest weapon, and the most complete victory. Taeho felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The third riddle would determine whether the human prisoners lived or died. He had come so far, but the hardest part was still ahead. What treasure becomes more valuable when it is given away? Master Vorth asked. What weapon becomes sharper when it is shared? What victory is achieved through apparent defeat? The crowd fell silent, waiting for the answer that would decide the fate of 4 human lives. The third riddle hung in the air like a challenge that could not be ignored. Teho stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by thousands of Rakeshi warriors, all waiting to see if the small human translator could solve the most difficult puzzle. Their culture had ever created the treasure that becomes more valuable when given away, the weapon that becomes sharper when shared, and the victory achieved through apparent defeat. These concepts seemed to contradict everything the Rakeshi believed about strength and conquest. Teho closed his eyes and thought about his life on Earth and Luna Station. He remembered his teachers who had shared their knowledge freely, making themselves smarter by teaching others. He thought about the books he had read and the languages he had learned, each one opening new worlds of understanding. The answer was knowledge, but it was more than that. It was the willingness to share what you knew, even when it might cost you an advantage. It was the understanding that making others stronger made you stronger too. He opened his eyes and looked at Master Vorth, then at Chief Balax, and finally at the thousands of Rakeshi warriors filling the arena. These aliens had spent generations believing that strength came from taking from others, but the riddle was asking about a different kind of power. The treasure that becomes more valuable when given away is knowledge. Teho said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent arena. When a teacher shares knowledge with a student, both become smarter. When a master trains an apprentice, the wisdom grows stronger. The weapon that becomes sharper when shared is also knowledge, he continued. A secret known by one person is weak, but a truth known by many becomes powerful. When warriors share their fighting techniques with each other, the whole army becomes stronger. The victory achieved through apparent defeat is the victory of learning and growing, he declared. Sometimes we must lose a battle to win a war. Sometimes we must admit we are wrong to discover what is right. Sometimes we must appear weak to find true strength. The arena erupted in the loudest cheers yet. The Rakeshi warriors were on their feet, all four arms raised in salute. Master Vorth nodded with deep respect, and even Chief Balax seemed impressed by the human answer. All 3 riddles have been answered, the old warrior announced to the crowd. This small human has shown wisdom that surpasses his size. The prisoner shall be freed with honor. But just as the celebration began, a commotion erupted at the main entrance to the arena. A group of Rakeshi warriors marched in, carrying weapons and war banners. Their leader was even larger than Chief Balax, with scars covering his copper skin and hatred burning in his eyes. War Chief Drak had arrived with his rival clan, and he was not pleased with the peaceful resolution. He strode into the arena, followed by dozens of his warriors, all armed and ready for battle. The crowd fell silent as the 2 groups of Rakeshi faced each other. This is weakness, Chief Balax. War Chief Drak roared in the ancient language. You allow alien trickery to corrupt our sacred traditions. These humans should fight and die as our laws demand. Chief Balax stepped forward, his own warriors forming ranks behind him. The arena suddenly felt like a powder keg ready to explode as 2 of the most powerful Rakeshi clans prepared for civil war. The humans are under my protection, Chief Balax replied, his voice steady but dangerous. They have proven their worth through wisdom and courage. War Chief Drak laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Wisdom is for the weak, he snarled. Only strength matters, only blood has meaning. I challenge your decision and demand that the old ways be followed. The crowd was divided, with some warriors supporting Chief Balax, while others shouted approval for War Chief Drak. Teho realized that his success in solving the riddles had created a new crisis. The rival clan saw his victory as a threat to their entire way of life. According to Rakeshi law, War Chief Drak had the right to challenge the decision, but such challenges had to be settled through single combat. Chief Balax was honor-bound to accept, even though he was older and had been injured in recent battles. The 2 chiefs began to circle each other in the arena sand, their weapons drawn, but before they could fight, Teho stepped forward and did something that shocked everyone present. I challenge war Chief Drak myself, he announced in the Rakeshi language. The arena exploded in chaos as warriors from both clans argued about whether a human could even participate in such a sacred ritual. Some shouted that it was impossible, while others pointed out that Teho had earned the right through solving the riddles. War Chief Drak stared at the small human translator in disbelief. You are not even a warrior, he said. How can you challenge me to combat? But Chief Balax spoke up, supporting Teho. He has proven his courage and wisdom, he declared. If he wishes to fight for his beliefs, then our laws allow it, Master Vorth raised his arms for silence and consulted with the other elder warriors. After a long discussion, he made the official ruling. The human translator has earned the right to make this challenge, he announced. The duel will take place at dawn that night. Chief Balex tried to teach Teho the basics of Rakeshi combat, but they both knew it was hopeless. The human translator was less than half the size of War Chief Drak and had never been in a real fight in his life. You do not have to do this, Chief Balex said as they practiced with wooden weapons. You could withdraw the challenge and leave with your people, but Teho shook his head. I came here to save those 3 humans, he said. If I run away now, everything I said about courage and sacrifice will be meaningless. Captain Li So Young had been released from her cage to tend to Teho wounds from the practice session. She looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. You are insane, she said quietly. You are a translator, not a warrior. This is not your fight. But Teho knew she was wrong. This was exactly his fight. He had spent his whole life avoiding confrontation, choosing the safe path over the right one. His ex-girlfriend Nari had been right when she said he was too passive. But now he had a chance to prove that courage came in many forms. The night passed slowly, and as dawn approached, Teho felt fear creeping into his heart. War Chief Drak was a legendary warrior who had killed dozens of opponents in single combat. There was no way a human translator could defeat him in a fair fight, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the real victory was not in winning, but in being willing to fight for what you believed in. Maybe the greatest strength was not in the power to destroy, but in the courage to protect. As the sun rose over the arena, Teho stood facing War Chief Drak in front of thousands of Rakeshi spectators. The alien warrior was massive and confident, carrying weapons that looked like they could cut through stone. Teho had chosen a smaller blade and a defensive shield, hoping to use speed and intelligence to overcome brute force. He knew his chances were almost zero, but he also knew that sometimes the most important battles were the ones you were supposed to lose. War Chief Drak raised his weapon and let out a thunderous war cry that echoed through the arena. The crowd roared in response, and the duel began. The massive Rakeshi warrior attacked immediately, swinging his huge weapon in an arc that would have split Teho in half if it had connected, but the human translator was already moving, using his smaller size to stay just out of reach. The first few minutes of the fight were pure survival for Teho. He dodged and rolled and scrambled away from attacks that came with bone-crushing force. War Chief Drak was skilled and experienced, but he was also overconfident, expecting to end the fight quickly. As the battle continued, something unexpected began to happen. The crowd started cheering for Teho, not because he was winning, but because he was fighting with honor despite being hopelessly outmatched. His willingness to risk everything for strangers, his refusal to give up even when bloodied and exhausted, began to embody the very warrior spirit the Rakeshi claimed to value. War Chief Drak, despite his physical dominance, began to look like a bully picking on someone weaker. The alien warrior grew frustrated as his easy victory turned into a real fight, and his attacks became wilder and less controlled. Then Teho saw his chance as War Chief Drak overextended himself, trying to land a killing blow. The human translator managed to slip inside his guard and strike with his smaller blade. The cut was minor, barely scratching the alien thick skin, but it drew blood. The crowd went wild as they witnessed something impossible. The tiny human had actually wounded the mighty War Chief Drak. It was not a victory, but it was proof that courage could overcome fear, that determination could triumph over despair. War Chief Drak stepped back and looked at the small drop of blood on his arm, then at Teho, who was swaying on his feet from exhaustion and injuries. The alien warrior slowly lowered his weapon, and something changed in his expression. You fight with honor, small human, he said in a voice that carried across the arena. You are braver than warriors twice your size. I yield this battle to youth. Arena erupted in the loudest cheers, yet as War Chief Drak offered Teho a warrior salute. Your prisoners are free, he announced, and your courage will be remembered in our songs. Teho collapsed to his knees in the bloody sand, finally allowing himself to smile. He had been hired to translate, but he had ended up communicating something far more important than words. The celebration in the arena was unlike anything the Rakeshi had ever seen before. Thousands of warriors from both clans were cheering together, united in their admiration for the small human translator who had shown them a new kind of courage. War Chief Drac and Chief Balak stood side by side, offering their respect to Teho as he struggled to stay conscious. But the moment of triumph was interrupted by the arrival of messengers from the outer settlements. They brought news that changed everything. A massive storm was approaching Vega Prime, unlike any the planet had seen in decades. The winds were already destroying outlying villages, and the main city would be hit within hours. The Rakeshi had ancient protocols for dealing with such storms, but they required the cooperation of all the clans. Chief Balak and War Chief Drac had been feuding for years, making coordination impossible. Now, with the storm approaching, they had to choose between their pride and their people's survival. Master Vorth approached Tahoe as medical officers tended to his wounds. The old warrior looked troubled by the news from the messenger's human translator. He said in the formal language, "Your victory has brought our clans together, but now we face a challenge that cannot be solved through combat alone. The great storm will test our unity in ways that fighting cannot." Teho listened as the situation was explained to him. The storm was not just wind and rain, but a phenomenon unique to Vega Prime that could last for days. It brought with it electrical discharges that could destroy buildings and sandstorms that could bury entire districts. The Rakeshi survival strategy involved moving their entire population into underground shelters carved deep into the rock beneath the city, but the shelter system was complex, requiring coordination between different clan territories and resources. Some tunnels belonged to Chief Balak's clan, while others were controlled by War Chief Drac. The problem was that neither clan trusted the other enough to share their shelter spaces. War Chief Drac suspected that Chief Balak would try to claim the best tunnels for his own people, while Chief Balak worried that War Chief Drac would use the crisis to launch a surprise attack. Years of rivalry and mistrust had created a situation where the Rakeshi might destroy themselves through their inability to work together. The storm was approaching fast, and every minute of delay meant more lives at risk. Captain Li So Young had been listening to the discussion, and she approached Teho with a concerned expression. "This is not your problem," she said quietly. "You have done more than enough already. The shuttle is still waiting. We can leave before the storm hits." But Teho shook his head as he looked at the thousands of Rakeshi warriors filling the arena. These aliens had welcomed him and tested him and ultimately accepted him as one of their own. He could not abandon them now when they needed help. Most of the 3 human prisoners were free, but that was only part of the mission. Now, the real challenge was helping an entire civilization survive a crisis that threatened to tear them apart. Ho stood up despite his injuries and walked to the center of the arena where Chief Balak and War Chief Drac were arguing about shelter assignments. The 2 clan leaders were surrounded by their advisors, all shouting suggestions and accusations. He raised his voice and spoke in Rakeshi loud enough for everyone to hear. "You are making the same mistake that almost cost my people their lives," he said. "The storm does not care about your clans or your territories. It will destroy anyone who stands alone, but it cannot defeat people who work together." The arguing stopped as both clan leaders turned to listen to the human translator. "On my world, we have a saying," Teho continued. "A single stick breaks easily, but many sticks bundled together cannot be broken. Your clans are strong separately, but together you are unbreakable." War Chief Drac crossed his forearms and looked skeptical. "How can we trust each other when we have been enemies for so long?" he asked. "What if this is a trick to weaken our defenses?" Chief Balak nodded with similar concerns. "Our people have died fighting each other for generations. How can we suddenly become allies?" Teho looked around the arena at the thousands of warriors from both clans who had been cheering together. "Just minutes before you already are allies," he said. "You proved it when you all celebrated together after the duel. You proved it when you all recognized courage regardless of which clan it came from." He pointed to the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "That storm is your real enemy, not each other. It does not care about your old feuds or your clan pride. It will kill your children and destroy your cities unless you fight it together." The clan leaders exchanged glances, and Teho could see them considering his words, but he knew that logic alone would not be enough to overcome generations of mistrust. "Let me propose something," he said. "What if we create mixed groups for the shelter assignments? Half from each clan working together. If anyone tries to betray the others, they will be betraying their own people too." Master Vorth nodded approvingly at the suggestion. "It is a wise plan," he said, "but who will coordinate such an effort? Who can both clans trust? To be fair, the answer was obvious to everyone in the arena. The human translator, who had proven his courage and wisdom, would have to take charge of the evacuation effort. Tejo had never organized anything larger than a translation project, but now he was being asked to help save an entire city. The storm was getting closer, and the first winds were already reaching the arena. The Rikishi had maybe 3 hours to get their entire population underground before the worst of the weather. Aravedaho accepted the responsibility and immediately began dividing the clans into mixed work groups. Each group would be responsible for a different section of the shelter system, with warriors from both clans working side by side. The first challenge was mapping the underground tunnels. Chief Balex and War Chief Drak had to share information about secret passages and hidden chambers that their clans had kept secret for decades. This required a level of trust that seemed impossible just hours earlier. Captain Lee So-young, Engineer Park Min-woo, and Medical Officer Han Jie volunteered to help with the evacuation effort. Their human perspective on organization and logistics proved valuable as they worked with Rikishi engineers to optimize the shelter assignments. The storm arrived sooner than expected, with winds that howled like living creatures and lightning that lit up the sky in colors that hurt to look at. The first wave of evacuees had barely reached the tunnels when the full force of the weather hit the city. Tejo found himself running through collapsing streets, helping to guide stragglers to safety while debris flew through the air like deadly missiles. The Rikishi warriors, who had been fighting each other for generations, were now working together to save elderly clan members and protect small children in the underground shelters. The situation was chaotic, but not hopeless. The mixed groups were functioning better than anyone had expected, with former enemies sharing food and medical supplies. Warriors who had been trying to kill each other just days before were now risking their lives to help each other. Families. The storm raged for 18 hours, testing every aspect of the evacuation plan. Several tunnel sections flooded and had to be abandoned, while others were blocked by cave-ins. But the Rikishi worked together to solve each problem as it arose throughout the crisis. Tejo moved between different shelter areas, helping to resolve disputes and coordinate resources. His translation skills proved useful for more than just language, as he helped different groups understand each other's needs and concerns. When the storm finally passed and the Rikishi emerged from their shelters, they found a city that had been battered but not destroyed. The cooperation between the clans had saved thousands of lives and proved that their ancient rivalries were not as important as their shared survival. Chief Balex and War Chief Drak stood together in the ruins of the arena, looking at the damage but also at their people who had survived because they worked together. The human translator has taught us something valuable, Chief Balex said. Our strength comes not from fighting each other, but from protecting each other. War Chief Drak nodded in agreement. We have been fools to waste so much time on old feuds when we could have been building something better together, but the real test was still to come. The storm had forced the clans to cooperate, but would that cooperation survive when the immediate crisis was over? The answer would determine whether Tejo's mission had truly succeeded, or if the Rikishi would return to their old ways of conflict and mistrust. 3 days after the storm passed, the Rikishi were still working together to rebuild their city. The cooperation that had saved them during the crisis continued as warriors from both clans cleared debris, repaired buildings, and helped families who had lost their homes. Tejo watched from the arena balcony as former enemies worked side by side. He was recovering from his injuries, but more importantly, he was seeing something that few humans had ever witnessed: an entire alien civilization choosing to change their most fundamental beliefs about strength and conflict. Captain Lee So-young found him there as the sun set over the damaged but surviving city. She had been helping coordinate the reconstruction effort using her command experience to organize work crews and distribute supplies. You did something incredible here, she said, sitting beside him on the stone bench. These people were ready to kill each other 3 days ago, and now they are building houses together. Tejo smiled despite the pain from his healing wounds. I just translated. He said they did all the hard work. The captain shook her head. No, you did much more than translate. You showed them that there was another way to be strong. You risked your life for strangers and proved that courage comes in many forms. Engineer Park Min-woo and Medical Officer Hanjie joined them on the balcony. Both had been working non-stop since the storm, helping with repairs and treating injured. Rakeshi, they looked exhausted but satisfied. The shuttle is ready whenever you want to leave, Engineer Park said, but honestly, I think we might be learning more here than we would back at Headquarters Medical. Officer Han nodded in agreement. These people have medical knowledge that could help human colonies. She said their understanding of trauma treatment is actually more advanced than ours in some ways, but even as they talked about the future, Taeho could see signs that the old divisions were not completely gone. Some Rakeshi still looked at members of the other clan with suspicion, and there had been several arguments about how to rebuild certain districts. The real test came that evening when Chief Balax and War Chief Drak called a meeting of all the clan leaders. They had to decide how to govern the city now that the immediate crisis was over. Would they return to their old system of rival territories or create something new? The meeting was held in the damaged arena with representatives from both clans sitting in mixed groups rather than separate sections. This was already a break from tradition, but Taeho could feel the tension in the air as old habits fought against new ideas. Master Vorth stood to address the assembly, and his ancient voice carried the weight of centuries of Rakeshi history. We have survived the great storm, he said, but now we face a different kind of challenge. We must decide who we want to be going forward. Do we return to the old ways of clan against clan, or do we choose a new path? War Chief Drak stood up, and Taeho held his breath, wondering if the massive warrior would reject everything they had learned. The alien looked around the arena at the mixed groups of former enemies. I have fought Chief Balak's clan for most of my life, he said, his voice echoing through the space. I believe that strength came from defeating your opponents, from taking what you wanted through force. He paused and looked directly at Tehabat. A small human translator showed me that I was wrong. Real strength comes from protecting others, from building something together that is stronger than anything you could create alone. The crowd murmured in surprise as War Chief Drak extended his forearms toward Chief Balax in the traditional gesture of alliance. I propose that we merge our clans into one people, he declared, united not by conquest but by choice, strong not through conflict but through cooperation. Chief Balax stood and accepted the alliance gesture. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Taeho noticed that not everyone was celebrating. Some of the older warriors from both clans looked unhappy with the decision over. The following days, the integration process began with mixed results. Most of the Rakeshi embraced the new unity, especially the younger warriors who had worked together during the storm, but some of the traditionalists resisted, arguing that the old ways had served them well for thousands of years. The resistance came to a head when a group of conservative warriors challenged the new alliance. They demanded a return to the traditional clan system and threatened to leave the city if their demands were not met. Taeho found himself once again in the role of mediator as the two sides argued in the rebuilt council chambers. The humans were scheduled to leave that day, but he could not abandon the Rakeshi when they needed help most. The conservative warriors were led by an old fighter named Grix, who had served under War Chief Drak for decades. He stood before the council and spoke with the passion of someone defending his entire way of life. You ask us to abandon everything our ancestors built, he said. The clan system made us strong. The competition between us drove us to excel. Without rivalry, we will grow weak and soft. Taeho listened carefully to the arguments from both sides. He understood that the conservatives were not just being stubborn. They were genuinely afraid that losing their warrior culture would make them vulnerable to outside threats. When his turn came to speak, Taeho stood and addressed the council in the formal Rakeshi language he had learned. You are not abandoning your warrior culture, he said. You are making it stronger. A warrior who fights only for his own clan is limited, but a warrior who fights for all his people is unlimited. He pointed to the repairs that had been completed around the city. Look at what you accomplished when you worked together, he continued. You saved more lives and rebuilt faster than either clan could have done alone. That is not weakness, that is the ultimate strength. Old Grix was not convinced. What happens when we face real enemies, he asked. When other clans attack us, will your cooperation save us? Then the answer came from an unexpected source. A messenger arrived with news that a large army from the northern territories was approaching the city. The northern clans had heard about the alliance and saw it as a sign of weakness. They were coming to conquer what they thought was a divided and vulnerable population, the timing could not have been worse. The city was still recovering from the storm, and many of the defensive structures had been damaged. But the Northern Army was only 2 days away, and there was no time to evacuate Chief Balix and War Chief Drac immediately began planning their defense. But they quickly realized that the traditional clan tactics would not work against such a large force. Each clan fighting separately would be overwhelmed, but together they might have a chance. The battle preparations brought out the best in the new alliance. Warriors from both clans worked together to repair the city walls and organize the defense. Engineers shared their knowledge of siege tactics while scouts coordinated their intelligence gathering. Tejo found himself helping with the planning despite having no military experience. His role was to facilitate communication between the different groups and help resolve disputes about strategy and resource allocation. Captain Li So-young volunteered to help with the defense planning using her knowledge of human military tactics. The combination of human and Rikishi strategies created a defensive plan that was more sophisticated than anything either species could have developed alone. The Northern Army arrived at dawn on the second day with banners flying and war cries echoing across the desert. They expected to find a city divided and weakened by internal conflict. Instead, they found walls lined with defenders who fought with unprecedented coordination. The battle lasted all day, with the northern clans launching wave after wave of attacks against the city defenses. But the united Rikishi held their ground using tactics that combined the best of both clans. Tradition Tejo watched from the command post as former enemies fought side by side to protect their shared home. Warriors who had been ready to kill each other a week earlier now trusted each other with their lives. The turning point came when War Chief Drac and Chief Balix led a coordinated counterattack that broke through the Northern Army lines. The sight of the two former enemies fighting together so effectively demoralized the attackers, who had expected to face a divided force by sunset. The Northern Army was retreating, leaving behind their wounded and their broken siege equipment. The city had been saved not through the strength of individual clans, but through the power of unity. As the defenders celebrated their victory, Tejo realized that his mission was finally complete. The Rikishi had not just learned to work together. They had proven that their new way of life was actually stronger than their old traditions. Old Grix approached him after the battle, his four arms crossed in the gesture of respect. "You were right, human translator," he said. "Our alliance did not make us weak. It made us stronger than we have ever been. I apologize for doubting your wisdom." The celebration continued late into the night with warriors from both clans sharing food and stories. The humans were honored as heroes and offered permanent places in Rikishi society, but Tejo knew it was time to go home. He had been hired as a translator, and he had accomplished far more than anyone had expected. The 3 human prisoners were safe, the Rikishi clans were united, and an entire civilization had learned that true strength came from cooperation rather than conflict. As their shuttle lifted off from Vega Prime, Tejo looked down at the city he had helped save. The arena where he had faced his fears was being converted into a center for interclan cooperation, the place where warriors had once fought to